Good morning, everybody. Doc Dave here, and I have a very current affair episode today, which is called Hamstring Injuries. This has been brought to everybody's attention today that watched the NBA game with the Warriors last night when Steph Curry went out with a hamstring injury. So I am going to explain to you what a hamstring is, what an injury is, and how do you treat it. So this should be very current affair information. So hopefully he'll be back soon for the rest of the playoffs. But anyway, so what is a hamstring? Hamstrings are in the back of your thigh, the posterior thigh area between the buttocks and the knee. It's made up of three muscle groups. One is called the biceps femoris, not the bicep in your upper arm, but the bicep in your lower leg. It's also called that. The second one is called the semimembranous muscle, and the third is the semitendinous muscle. So these are large, big, strong muscles. They control your ability to walk and to exercise. So, what are the most common ways that the muscle is injured? How do you tear a hamstring? So, the most commonly, it's where you do a sharp, quick rotation movement of the lower extremity. It's where the torsion kicks in, and it causes the muscle fibers in one of those three groups, or all three groups, or two of the groups. It depends. And as that torsion comes in on the hamstrings, you're going to get tears in the muscle fibers. You can get a complete rupture of the hamstring, which obviously would require surgery. But more than likely, it's just some type of a tear or a strain. And we'll go into this in more detail in a few minutes, the different grades of muscle tears. But that's basically how it can come on. Now, it can also come on from overstretching. In other words, if you don't warm up properly, you don't heat your muscles up, you just get out and you start stretching your leg to the point where it will tear the fibers. It can also be caused by just, any type of sport, either running, sprinting fast without a proper warm-up. So anything you're going to be using where you stress the hamstrings and you don't properly warm up, and do your stretching, but you got to do your stretching after you warm up, and you got to do it in gradual amounts of degree of stretching. So it's basically, in a nutshell, any overexertion or stretching of the muscle group. It's like any other muscle, it's going to tear. So what is the actual function of the hamstring? What does the hamstring do? It's in the front of your thighs, you have four muscle groups called the quadriceps femoris. And those are used for straightening your lower leg. Okay, so those are your quads, the front of your thigh. In the back of your thigh, you got your three hamstring muscles, and those are used to flex or to bring in your lower leg at your knee. So your knee, the leg goes straight out, those are your quads. The knee bends and pulls in, those are your hamstrings. So, and the hamstrings are used, for everyday activities, walking, running, climbing stairs, etc. You can't do much without your hamstrings. So, what are the symptoms of a hamstring tear, strain, or rupture? Well, you get an immediate tearing sensation. You can possibly hear a popping sound or a sudden sharp pain. And you may look down and see that you have bruising and swelling in the back of your thigh. So there you got your injury. There's no way of getting around it. So Let's go now into the 3 grades of a hamstring tear, which I mentioned earlier. So you got a grade 1. All right, grade 1s are mild, small tears of the muscle fibers. There's less pain. It takes shorter time to heal. And it, usually will heal with something called medical tape, which is a KB type medical tape, support tape. It reduces the motion of the muscles and it supports the area that you're taping up. And then rest, obviously. So, you do a little resting, you put the tape on. It could take 2 to 3 weeks to get full function and get rid of the pain back. But that's usually the grade 1 tears. Now, the grade 2 tears are obviously more serious. There are more muscle fibers are torn, and it's more painful. And here's where you're going to see the bruising secondary to the bleed. Now, you're not going to generally see bruising or bleeding from a grade 1 tear, but you will see it from a grade 2 tear. So you look in the mirror, you look at the back of your thigh, and it's got black and blue. Okay, you got a grade 2 tear. And you'll get some swelling. Not a lot, but you'll get some swelling from the bleeding under the tissue. Treatment of this, well, it's a little more aggressive. Not only do you need the KB tape, but you need something called a diathermic ultrasound BFST. And the BFST means blood flow stimulation treatment. And this is where they go in with an ultrasound machine and they stimulate the back of your thigh where your hamstrings are. And this promotes increased blood flow to the area, which brings oxygen and healing nutrients to help the muscle fibers that are torn heal faster. So, but the slight drawback on this is it only lasts about 4 hours. So you got to go in like 2 or 3 times a day, especially if you're a professional athlete like Steph Curry. So he's going to be in there 3 or 4 times a day getting this diathermic ultrasound treatment. He will be wearing KB tape as well, and he will be resting the area in between times. There's no aggressive treatment on this. You can't be, doing special stretching and physical therapy right away, which I'm going to go into a little bit later as well, because that will re-injure any healing process and possibly tear more fibers and make the disorder worse. So patience, unfortunately, with this type of treatment. Okay, now, the other treatment that they do, and generally they do this initially before even the heat treatment. I probably should have mentioned this first, but there's something called the cold cure treatment. This is where they ice it down. This constricts the bleeding, prevents the bleeding from getting worse, the swelling from getting worse. And it's very effective for initial treatment. A couple of days first, and then you go to the diathermic ultrasound heating treatments because, you don't want necessarily to do the heating first, because if you do, then you're going to get more blood flow and you're going to get more swelling. And while the vessels are in a stage of trying to heal, you don't want all that going on. So you do cold first, and then you alternate it with the heat treatments. So then you have the grade 3 treatments. Now, this is a big deal. This is where you have severe damage, and it's a rupture of one of the muscle groups that I mentioned earlier. And this, they will do an MRI like they did on Steph Curry last night. And if they see a rupture, oh boy, into surgery you go. There's no diathermic treatment. There's no cold cure. There's no tape or rest that's going to heal that. That's going to require surgery and long-term healing process. And unfortunately, if that's what he has, it's probably the end of his career. I hate to say it, don't shoot the messenger, but that's how that's going to work. It's like a ruptured Achilles tendon. It takes years to really completely heal correctly. You're going to get some healing in 6 months to a year. But then you got to go through all the physical therapy, strengthen it up again, and it could be a real, impediment to an enjoyable lifestyle after that. So, what do you now that you know how to treat these? Well, what do you avoid? How do you avoid things that are going to make this possibly worse, going from a grade 1 to a grade 2 or a grade 2 to a grade 3? So, first thing you avoid is early stretching. You don't want to stretch the fibers while they're already torn and they're in the process of healing. So, some people, your coach in football back 40 years ago would say, oh, go stretch it out, put your leg up and stretch it out or whatever you do. That's bad because that'll increase the tearing and make it worse. That's why old school football coaches aren't doctors. Number 2, being impatient. It's the worst thing in the healing process you can have for a hamstring because you will re-injure it. You try after 2 or 3 days, you start to walk a little better. Now you're starting to jog, you're starting to stretch. Maybe you go to physical therapy right away, which isn't good. And next thing you know, the fibers are tearing again and increasing the tearing of the fibers and increasing the grade of injury. Number 3, pain meds. No. You can take them when you go to sleep at night if you need to help sleep, but don't take them during the day. Don't take them when you're during the healing process, where you get to the stage where you're doing physical therapy and stretching eventually, because it'll mask the pain and it will re-tear the fibers that are healing because, they're going to heal with scar tissue. That's, inevitable. That's how things heal. You cut yourself, it heals, but you leave a scar where the laceration was. So, and it's never quite as strong as the original fibers that you have. So you got to be careful with being impatient and trying to rush this cure. Number 4, massage. Don't massage early. You can massage later, part of your physical therapy as you're going through the healing process, but avoid it initially. You'll see people, they're laying on on their stomach, and you got some massage therapists trying to work out the injury, and next thing you know, you're going to get the re-tearing of the fibers again, and it's going to make it worse. You should usually wait 2 to 3 weeks after a grade 1 tear before you do any massaging, or 2 to 3 months after a grade 2 tear before you do any massaging. Okay, number 5, TENS units. Everybody's got a TENS unit nowadays. Oh God, I pulled my hamstring, I'm going to strap a TENS unit to it and start healing it. Well, no. Not for this type of injury, because the TENS is an electrical stimulation of the muscles, and it will contract the fibers, and it will tear the remaining fibers or the fibers that are trying to heal. So you can make a grade 1, again, worse into a grade 2 by using the TENS, because it's contracting, and before the fibers can heal, then you're going to tear them again and tear more. So no TENS units. Number 6, exercise. No, it puts stress on the torn fibers. No weightlifting, no cycling, no running, no jogging, until you start to heal. So this is important to know. You don't want to be out exercising, going to the gym, doing heavy lifting, or going out for a little cycle ride on the weekend to try to quote unquote stretch out the fibers, because you will tear them again. Number 7, resistance bands, not to be used initially, because they will stretch the fibers. Again, this sounds very repetitive, but they will stretch the fibers. The ones that are healing will tear again, and the ones that aren't torn will probably tear. So it's okay after the complete healing, but not in the initial phase of treatment. And last but not least, physical therapy. Don't do it too early. You're going to re-injure. you gotta let the healing take place first. Then it's okay to do the physical therapy. And any physical therapy worth its salt will tell you this. You go in on your crutches after day 3 and you're not walking on it and you expect to get physical therapy. No, that's not gonna happen. And if it does happen, don't ever go back to that physical therapist again. So, in summary, my gosh, so this was done today because I want to talk about Steph Curry. Now, he's 35 or 36 years old, so this type of injury came on now rather than 5 or 6 years ago because as we age, our muscles, age with us, obviously. And they're, as much of a professional elite athlete as he is, we're all susceptible to aging. And you look at a lot of professional sports players back in the day or even current that maybe played a little too long. Tom Brady was one of the, aberrations, but, a lot of guys will get injured and it really becomes a life, injury that they don't really recover from for a long time. So his age, his muscles, his tendons, his fibers in Steph Curry are not as strong or as resilient or as flexible as they were 5 or 6 years ago. So, it all depends on what the MRI shows. We're all hoping for a grade 1, mild even grade 1, where he may be back by game 3 at the earliest, certainly not by game 2, probably not till game 4. The thing I remember about the game is we were up 10 points when he went out and we won by 11. So we outscored him 1 point without him. I'm not saying he's, expendable, but, they can play without him until they need to. You have to remember, this is a game. It's a professional game and these people are getting paid well. But, you got to look at, his future. You don't want to take a grade 2, which he may have, and turn it into a grade 3 where he has to have surgery. And it's a real, lifestyle change for him and his family. He's getting ready to retire. He's got to make a decision here. So we'll see today what the MRI shows. So I hope this was educational. I hope this was informative, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. And thanks for your attention today, and I'll be back with future episodes. Enjoyed talking to you, and thanks for your time.